We do start with Proposal 1. Voters across Michigan made it very clear this was not the right plan to fix the state's crumbling bridges and roads. In fact, it was the most one-sided loss ever for a proposed amendment to the 1963 state constitution. 80% of voters who went to the polls, or 1.4 million Michigan residents, said no to raising the state sales tax and triggering funding for road repairs. Just 20% voted yes. The voter turnout was just under 25%. And so the talk turns to what happens now. And that is where we begin our discussion with our MiWeek contributors, Nolan Finley of the Detroit News and Stephen Henderson of the Detroit Free Press. Gentlemen, no surprise what happened this week on Tuesday. But before we jump into, okay, what is going to happen now, let's take a look at the staggering defeat here, Nolan. Did you think it was going to be this large?
No, I don't think anybody could have anticipated that. I would have thought 60-40 would have been the worst. I thought perhaps they'd go 55-45, but that was the biggest whooping I think anything's ever received at the ballot box in Michigan, at least in my time here.
And so it was a pretty early night. I mean, we had the feeling all along that this is the way it was going to go, but the amount between.
I was home by 9 o'clock, 9:15 on an election night. I can't ever remember that happening. You usually have to at least wait till 10.
We barely got to eat the newsroom pizza before it was over.
That's usually the big deal on election night. You get the newsroom pizza.
It was not close, and that's it's unfortunate that it wasn't. That it didn't do better. It's not unfortunate. I think that it didn't pass because I think the solution we'll get now will not be as comprehensive or long-term fix. We'll end up with something shorter term that maybe fixes the roads but doesn't deal with a lot of these other problems.
Well, I think that's the ideal solution. One of the problems with Prop 1 is it tried to do way too much. I think a simple sales tax increase with all the money going to the roads, and then you deal with the revenue shift in later legislation might have passed. In fact, polling indicates there was support for a clean bill. But when they start larding it up with all of these other things that had nothing to do with roads, it became very confusing. And one of the things that hasn't been talked about much here is that they put all of these extra add-ons to appease Democrats when this proposal was being crafted, and then the Democrats walked away from the plan. The party walked flat out away from it. And if a clean bill is all that's going to be accepted here.
I mean, I agree that it was complicated, but the reason it was complicated is because the way we fund roads and local government and schools right now is complicated, and this was an attempt to untangle everything so that gas taxes and things that have to do with roads would pay for roads, and other taxes would pay for other things. That's not, I don't think you can blame the legislature for trying to untangle a mess that's been tangled like that for 20 years.
No, but it raised about this proposal would have raised about $800 million beyond the
new
roads,
money,
about 40%.
Sure.
And there's not an appetite for that. Michigan has never passed a tax hike, a statewide tax hike, without offsetting it with another tax cut. This was a reach from the beginning. It was a tough proposal to sell. We backed it even knowing that it probably wasn't the ideal solution. But what they have to do now is go back and find the ideal solution. And I think it remains raising the gas tax. Was what they should have done in December when gas prices were $1.90 a gallon. You've got to raise gas prices by at least, or the gas tax by at least 20 cents a gallon, and you've got your money.
Okay, so some of the numbers that you were alluding to about what people are thinking now was a recent poll that said about 65% of Michiganders would say, you know what, I would raise the sales tax if I knew it was going to go directly to roads. But now 87% that were polled earlier said this is the #1 priority now that I want the legislature and the governor to work on. Do we think that it is going to have to come out of the legislature, that it's not going to be another ballot initiative, it's not going to be something that the voters are going to decide, that a solution for the road, Stephen, has to come out of Lansing?
Well, you don't need people to vote unless you're going to change the Constitution. And the only constitutional change I could think of that you would come up with this is a sales tax increase, which again was not about, the sales tax was not going to pay for roads. That was going to pay for the money you were losing from the fuel taxes you were getting rid of that pay for local governments and schools. So I think it will come out of the legislature at this point. I mean, there's no reason that they can't. But again, people have to understand this is short-term thinking, and this is the short-sighted policy making. Raising the gas tax. The gas tax is going to yield less and less money over time, because fuel efficiency is really ramping up. People are driving vehicles that don't suck as much gas down. That's not a long-term solution.
Well,
It'll
the
fix it for
wholesale
now.
shift helped ease some of that
Perhaps.
that long-term
Yeah.
impact. But yeah, it's got to be a legislative fix. I mean, there's no way there's funding for another ballot proposal or an appetite for it, and it doesn't have to be a short-term fix or a cosmetic patch. The governor should keep these folks in Lansing until they have a comprehensive solution, a solution that fixes the roads and brings us back to where we need to be. You keep them. You make this part of the budget process. He should not sign a single budget bill until they get a solution for roads. He shouldn't let them head to the beaches and golf courses in June. He should keep them in Lansing. What we don't need is a study committee for the summer, because it'll never get done. That's the mistake they made last year.
So you're looking at a little bit of leadership here. You think that
A
a
lot.
leadership role is going to make the difference here.
I think the governor has to lead on this. Yesterday he was a little bit soft on whether he would call a special session or not. He's got to be very clear to the legislature, we're going to get this done whatever it takes. I mean, he can't be gentle with them at this point. And, you know, he's got to be there pushing and pulling them to a solution.
All right, so now let's start to look at the various proposals or the various things that are starting to be floating out there. We look at the Speaker of the House, Kevin Cotter, is talking about maybe we should start looking at some of these restricted funds that are being held right now, that legislatively you would have to change to be able to access them, the things that are being held for education or for economic development. And you've got the Democrats saying, well, you're giving all these tax breaks to big businesses. Maybe you should be pulling back on that and using some revenue from there. So, Stephen, what are we starting to see an actual viable plan that's going to float?
I think that you start with the gas tax. They're gonna look at how to raise the gas tax in a way that gets you enough money to raise the $1.5 billion or whatever it is that the governor says he needs to start fixing the roads. But again, I think if that's all you do and you don't go any further, I don't think that's good policy making. I think there's an opportunity here to do some other things. I think there is an opportunity to revisit the burden that we have cast on individuals versus business in this state, and what we have gotten for it, what we haven't. And again, businesses use roads more so in this state than the individuals do. And so if we're going to have to pay more for roads, what's the ask we ought to be making of them? That's a conversation they ought to have. I'm not saying that you ought to roll back the $1.8 billion in tax breaks they got 3 years ago, but that number is the same as the number we're talking about raising off individuals for roads. That's not something you can just let go without a discussion. And then I also think you got to talk about some of the other things that could be done. Long-term gas tax not going to pay for what we need for the roads. We need $2 billion a year more to get the roads up to a condition that everybody would be happy with. Where should the rest of that money come from?
Nolan, what is the best plan that you think that
Well,
is going to start to come out?
First, let's talk about the worst plan, and that would be going back and putting an oppressive tax burden on business again. We had that for a long time in this state, and we weren't growing. We've given tax relief to job creators, and what's happening? We're creating jobs and economic development. I don't think you want to mess with that. I think it's got to be user fees. And I would disagree that business don't pay their fair share of that. They buy gasoline probably as much as anyone else. So you could raise truck weight fees, registration fees. You can raise the gas tax, but it's got to be user fees. And this business is about going to this pot of money and that pot of money and finding little gimmicks and one-time. A lot of that's not constitutional anyway. It's not legal. I mean, you have somebody out there saying, well, we could raid the catastrophic claims fund. I mean, you can't do that. And yet, the bills are going through. They've got to get realistic about what they can do and what they can't do. And if they can't get this done, I think the people of Michigan ought to be really thinking about what they're getting for the money they're spending on the legislature. We're one of 11 states with a full-time legislature. Given the disdain people have coming out of this for the legislature, this might be a good time to go to put a part-time legislative proposal on the ballot.
There are people who are sitting at home are thinking, you know what, there should be enough money in Lansing to figure out how to get this done. Why should we have to have any kind of fee raise? Why should there be any kind of new tax? Is there anywhere that they could cut across the board, Stephen? And I know there are people who are floating those ideas as well. Do we have enough money in the pot somewhere along the line to shift it around? People will be wondering.
The question is, what do you want to give up? What do you want to do less of? to shift money to pay for roads. We've already taken $9 billion away from local government in the last 15 years through revenue sharing cuts. Schools are not keeping pace with funding nationwide. We are slipping down that ladder. Higher ed is slipping even more down the ladder in terms of rank order, in terms of what we pay for it in the state. There's not that much that state government actually does that's discretionary. You know, it's a fraction of the budget that you have a choice about where you spend it or where you don't. We need more money for most things in this state, I think. I think we need more money for higher ed and schools and local governments and roads. So this idea that there's just money sitting around that can be used for these things, it's not so.
What do you expect to see now in the next week, Nolan?
A lot of posturing, a lot of proposals that don't make a whole lot of sense. This across-the-board cut idea is the worst way to govern. You know, it assumes that there's built-in fat in every single department. There's places they can get money. I'd take a quarter of the corrections budget and say, let's revisit who we're locking up and why and for how long.
But you need comprehensive sentencing reform to do that.
Yeah, exactly, and they're not going to do that.
take a long time.
They're not going to cut education. So they can pretend they can find this money, but the main silos of cash in this state are education, welfare and health care, corrections, transportation, and local government. I mean, which of those are they going to cut? And so all of this notion that, well, we got a $52 billion budget, we could find $1 billion in that. They've got a $9 billion discretionary general fund.
Right.
That's a whole different challenge to get $1 billion out of that. So I think, you know, the governor's going to put a plan on the table that raises user fees, and he's going to have to bust some heads to try to get it passed.
All right, well, so we should be prepared for a bumpy ride. See what I did there?
You
That's
should.
a good one.
I mean, one of the things that Democrats would need to stick to is the idea that if you raise these taxes, it's going to hit poor people harder. Restoring the earned income tax credit, which was part of this proposal.
Part of the proposal people rejected. That will not be in there, Steve.
That wasn't the reason that people rejected it.
You start larding this up again with non-road spending,
not gonna vote
and they're
on it.
never going to get it to pass. The Democrats had a chance to support this bill, and they walked away from it. I don't think they have any leverage at the table now.